Hello, welcome to the SerenITaaS AppZero demonstration. Today we're just going to be demonstrating a very basic PDF viewer application being moved from Windows Server 2003 R2 x86 platform to Windows Server 2012 R2. Right now we're currently looking at the Windows Server 2003 just to demonstrate the application that's going to be moved over. The Foxit PDF viewer. I'm going to open it up, see exactly how the program operates. Very basic PDF viewer, really don't need to do much more than that. So without further ado, what we will do is we will move over to our Server 2012, and from here we will do a pre-migration check. So after you get the AppZero application installed, there's a few things that you'll want to do before starting your migration. The most basic, obviously, making sure that the machines can talk to one another. So what we'll do here is we'll do a quick ping of SerenITaaS 54, which is where the Windows Server 2003 machine is, with the Foxit PDF viewer. So we get a successful ping here, which is terrific, meaning that we'll be able to at least communicate with the machine. So we will begin by doing a AppZ pre-check. And what this is going to do, it's going to query the source machine to determine if there's anything glaring, any major showstoppers that would prevent us from migrating, at least attempting the migration. So what we have to do here, you command line check of AppZ pre-check, the host name, along with the local administrator password. It's important to point out here that everything that you're doing within the AppZero program is all based on the local administrators. Even though we can see from here that both these machines are domain connected, the permissions are still not high enough. They need to be the local administrator. No questions asked. One other important thing to point out is the passwords of the local administrator should never be the same. So for example here, the local admin password on the source machine is password with an @ and a 0. The password on the destination machine here is password with an @ and a 0, but we've added a 1 to the end of it so that there's no conflictions there, because that will prevent or cause errors in the migration process. So we'll take a quick look here at what the AppZ pre-check exactly is portioned out for us. So it's told us that port 445 is open, which is good, meaning if we needed to do any secure IIS applications, we would be able to use that channel. We're both domain connected. Machines don't need to be domain connected. They can be work group. They can go from domain to work group machine. Either way, it doesn't stop it. It's probably better that they do. In the essence, if you're migrating something that's using a service account of a domain user, well, if you bring that over to a machine that's obviously not domain connected, you won't be able to run the application as if it's trying to run using an account on the domain. You wouldn't be able to do that. Below that, we see the OS version. So 6.3.9600 is 2012 R2. It's 5.2.3790. Windows Server 2003 x86. We'll have a system type, because you can actually use the AppZero program for desktops, not just for servers. So you can go from, for example, if you've still got applications sitting on your Windows XP desktop and you need to get them to your Windows 8 desktop, well, you can use that for the program as well. One recommendation is you don't really want to go from, say, a Windows XP to a Server 2012 or Server 2003 to a Windows 8, as there are differences in the underlying operating systems. Next, we've got a .NET Framework version check, just to make sure that everything is compatible that way. Below that, we have Web Deploy. Web Deploy is used if you're moving an IIS application over. In this instance, since we don't need it installed, so it is not installed. I'll also point out that you only have to have it as a pre-requirement. You only have to have it installed before you run the application, before you run the AppZero program on the source machine. If you're moving an IIS application you don't need it installed on the destination machine immediately, because AppZero will actually install that for you as it's going through the process. So now below that, it's verifying that it's actually using the built-in administrator account on both machines. It is then looking at antiviruses. Antivirus software can cause a lot of problems, just as it's the pure essence of the AppZero program, as it's going in and really digging down into binary files. Most antivirus programs would look at that as an attack on the system and try and prevent anything from happening there. So better if you can have them shut down. It's definitely not a showstopper, but it could cause a lot of problems in the process. But given a lot of environments, sometimes that is definitely will cause problems in trying to get any changes approved or such for migrating an application over. And one thing to point out is it's absolutely imperative that no antivirus software be installed on the destination machine beforehand. That's just there's no workaround around that. It's just a hard stop requirement of the program. Below that, we have the remote administrator shares, meaning that we can access the entire file system on the remote machine, this being the source machine, and on the local machine, the destination machine, we need the LAN manager authentication level set in the security policy, which it is. So without further ado, we can proceed to migrating the application. Now there's three main programs that the AppZero program uses. There's the AppZero CLI, which you just saw. I ran a pre-check from there. There's the Administrative Council, which is where you could administer everything that's going on, because what exactly AppZero does is it creates a virtual appliance that migrates the entire application and anything that is required along with it, such as services or remote accounts, over into a virtual appliance that runs on the destination operating system, but within its own environment. It needs its own virtual file system, its own virtual directory, its own dedicated memory. So there's no chance of it interfering with the underlying destination operating system. Should you have a program that's already there and you're trying to bring it over to test it out to see if it'll actually work, you can do it within a segregated environment before actually putting it and finally dissolving it onto the destination operating system. So this is where you would be able to, the administrative council is where you can actually create these virtual appliances, populate them with applications from older operating systems, or for that matter even other Windows Server 2002 application, as you can go from like to like or old to newer. You can't go from new to old. You can't go, if you did, for example, if you migrated over to a 2012 platform and the application just wasn't working at all, and you discovered that, hey, maybe I should have gone to 2008, unfortunately we can't go back from 2012, 2008. It has to be at the same level or higher. So what we're going to do today to move the application over, though, is actually use what they call the Tether Council. This is basically just a small portion of what's in the Administrator Council, but just specifically used for creating a VAA, bringing over one application, and getting it to the destination operating system for testing, and then from there we can use the AppZero CLI to actually dissolve it into the underlying destination operating system. So since we're bringing over Foxit PDF Viewer, we'll just call this appliance Foxit. We put in the source name and the local administrator password, and we find the application. So now it's talking to the source machine, trying to discover all of the applications that we could move over, getting the remote services that are tied to any of this. So now we've got a list of applications that are installed on our source operating system. So obviously Foxit came up. We don't have anything else installed on here, so the list is very small. One thing to point out here about this Tether Council is when you're finding the applications, you'll often get back a different variety of colors here. You'll get back green, yellow, red, or blue. Quick definition is basically AppZero has a database that they keep that says, you know what, we've successfully migrated these programs, they worked, there was no need. So I'll just give you a brief demonstration. If it's green, it means AppZero has it logged in their database as a successful. There's no extra work needed. You should just be able to select the program, tether it over, and no extra work will be required. If it's yellow, it means that the program will come over and run successfully. However, you may need to change some things in the underlying program in order to make it operate. An example of that there would be if you were bringing over an IIS website that was attached to a database that's, let's say, installed somewhere, and you needed to change a config file, or because you were migrating the database over as well, you may need to change a database name or something like that in config files. That's typically what they're talking about when they say that extra work is needed to be done, or you need to change the permissions of a file or something like that in order to make it operate going forward here. Red means it's absolutely not supported, not recommended in any way, shape, or form. And blue means it's just never been tested. They have no information in their database about people moving it over or anything like that. So without further ado, what we do here first is we'll select the Foxit Reader program, and then we'll go over to the Services tab and see if there's any services running on the source operating system that are associated with the Foxit Reader that may need to be pulled over as well. Now, one thing to point out here, if there are services to come over, before the migration can actually occur, those local services have to be stopped on the source machine. So this could prevent you from doing a test during normal business hours. It would have to be during a window where the machine could have those services shut down. One of the most potent examples would be if you were moving a database, you'd have to have all subsequently attached applications knowing that the database is going to be going down, as those services have to be stopped. But one thing that we can do here is we can actually stop the services on the source machine from the tether console here. So if we go over to, log back in here, the source machine, we will see that the service that is associated with, if I could make this bigger, is the Foxit Cloud update service. So right now we can see that it started and running. So I'm going to go over here and I'm actually going to stop the remote service. And then we're going to come back over here and we'll give ourselves a refresh. And we're going to see that the service has actually been stopped. So we know that the tether console is actually talking to the source machine at this point. And from here, what we'll do is we'll check remote accounts. So the Foxit Reader doesn't use any remote accounts at all, so we don't need to worry about that. Kind of an example of where that would be used is if you had once again, a web application or some sort of application that is using an account that is located on that machine that would need to come over and to have the subsequent permissions to run or go into files that would be associated with the program, then you would need to bring those accounts over, and they would be all listed in here, of course. And 9 times out of 10, AppZero is going to realize that, hey, this account is needed for these programs, so it's going to require that it come over anyways. So now we can start our tether. So what it's doing here is it's actually going out to the source operating system and bringing over the files that are required. And what I will do is I will show you. So what AppZero does is it creates an appliance file system here, and that's our VAA Foxit. And underneath here is where the virtual registry gets created, the virtual file system gets created. The CStore_C is actually all the work files that would be required from the C drive on the source operating system coming over to the appliance. Now it's not going to bring everything, of course. It's only going to bring those files that are actually required to run the Foxit PDF viewer program, as well as other things that sit underneath here. Kind of an interesting thing is we can get a product list of what is actually on here. So when you're looking at this, you can see the product list, Foxit. That can all be done beforehand too, and you can get a good idea of what might actually be able to come across. So now it's actually going to be docking, and what the process of docking is doing is actually activating turning the virtual appliance on, so that the application may be run from the destination operating system at this point. And we can kind of verify that by going into the Start menu, and you can see that we now have the AppZero VAA Foxit. And 2 things to point out here. Obviously, AppZero VAA being in front of Foxit kind of indicates that it is running within its own little virtual appliance outside of the destination operating system. And you can tell that the AppZero, you can see the icon here, that sits down in the lower right to indicate that once again it is within a AppZero virtual appliance. So we'll go back to the desktop. Now what we need to do is start the service in order to make sure that the program is going to operate correctly. So now it's started. Now something to point out is this is just on the virtual registry at this point. Now that everything is all done, we could actually come back here and start the service on the source operating system so that should people want to continue to operate during the time, they could do that. So now we can run both simultaneously without any hiccups. One thing to point out about that, though, is if you were moving a database, anything at this point that is updated on the source machine would not be brought over. It's only at this point when we're tethering, if the program goes out and realizes that it needs a binary, it will go and get that binary, but it won't bring any actual file. So if you've updated a database line and that sort of thing, those won't be updated. There is a feature in the administrative console where you can actually do tether sync. So if you knew that you needed to move an application over a span of 24 hours and that you needed to have updates written to that, well, you could have it start to pre-populate everything that comes over. And let's say, all right, I wanted to start this at 9 a.m. Well, you could have it running all day, and then come 1 a.m. in the morning when, okay, everything can be shut down. Well, that's when we can do our final sync. It'll bring everything else over, and then from there, we can make sure that everything's running and do the cutover during that point in time. So, in essence, to make the tether time less, because if you are bringing over a 2 gigabyte database or even a 100 gigabyte database, it will bring all of that data over. So it really depends on whether or not, if you are on a very slow old connection on a 100 meg switch for the server, well, it's going to take some time. Or if they've been updated and you're on a 10 gig network, well, it shouldn't be that much time, but you are still limited to what the actual machine can bump out. So now we can see that we have the Foxit reader actually operating within the new Windows Server 2012 R2 environment. And as it starts up here, one thing I'm actually going to do that so that we can demonstrate run. Let's just bring over a PDF. To make sure that our program actually works. One thing to keep in mind is obviously, given that it's running within its own virtual appliance, we don't have control over the resources that the actual appliance gets. Sometimes it can be a little slow, so just always keep in mind, bear in mind that it is typically operating until you get a hard stop fault with the program. One interesting thing to point out here is you can actually see that we have the Foxit PDF viewer icon under the open desktop folder there. But if I go to the actual desktop folder, I don't see that yet. That is because that the PDF viewer is still running within its own virtual environment. So if I select this and open it, we now see that We can read the PDF, no problems, and the application is running. So we can now close it down and then finish off the tethering. So that's going to basically undock, get everything prepared for actually dissolving the application onto the destination operating system, at which point it will be running within the destination operating system's file system. It'll be using its registry, so on and so forth. One thing to point out here is now that you can see the Tether Console has actually created that appliance. It sits in here. We have all of the tether settings that were used, the services that were associated with it, any appliance logs that came along. You can see very good logs. So if you do run into errors, there's 9 times out of 10 the logs are going to tell you exactly what the associated problem is, any accounts that would have needed to be brought over. So one thing to keep in mind is that you need the Foxit or the appliance to be in an undocked state. So one way I like to think about this is the undocked state is the appliance being turned off, or virtual appliance, virtual machine being turned off, versus being docked, in which case it's on and actually operating, because now we can see that it's undocked, so off. That application is actually now removed from the start menu, and there's no way to run it while it's in that powered down state, I like to call it. So from here, what we'll do is we'll use what they call an AppZero dissolve, which at this point what it does is it takes the virtual appliance and interlaces it with the destination operating system to a point of where it's running natively on the destination machine. And aha, if I could spell. Appliances. There we go. So as you can see, it's dissolving through to the registry, and at the end we get the has been dissolved successfully. As well, if there were any errors along the way, it creates an HTML file that will give you exactly the point in time where it was hanging up and why it couldn't be fully integrated into the destination machine. And now you can see that we now have the AppZero PDF viewer icon attached to the .pdf file. If we go into the start menu, I now just have Foxit Reader and no AppZero icon on it, indicating that the application is actually running completely on the destination machine at this point. And now we can open up and we've got our file. One little last bit of information to point out is if we come to the Add Remove Control panel, we actually see that we have the Foxit Reader in here. And you'll notice that it's been installed on October the 24th. That is actually when we set up the source machine, so it'll have that date. So if you're moving an application that was installed in 2004 on your Windows 2003 machine, it'll actually have the install date of 2004. Kind of convenient if you're actually looking through and saying, hey, when was this application installed and that sort of thing, so that you can get an idea of the age of the application, especially now that if it's out of support or anything like that, and you're thinking about actually upgrading the application but just don't have the time to get it upgraded before Windows Server 2003 was going end of life support. Anyways, I'd like to thank you for viewing this today, and happy migrating.